In 50 years, I would like to see the transporter from Star Trek, or at least flying cars, and definitely the Hyperloop.
My name is Tassilo Banner. I'm leading Global Public and Regulatory Affairs with Lilium. Based on the data that we will be collecting, based on the flight hours that we will prove over the first few years of operations, we will step by step open the door and enter into the era of aviation of the future. This includes unmanned operations. This includes automated air traffic management. And we are already part of working groups that are laying out the foundation for such operations. This is why we are confident and positive that the vision will come true: air transportation in a sustainable way, available to everyone.
Hello, my name is Mark Amblar, Managing Director of Ulster Consulting, Mobility Advisor based in Silicon Valley. Let's look at what may happen in say 50 years out. Mobility will be then massively shared with new modes including hypersonic planes or electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. Ownership will be limited to individual soft modes or fun vehicles to enjoy on racetracks or off-road. Think of horses that went from being used to pull carriages 100 years ago to being owned for riding purpose today. Vehicles will operate autonomously except for unique cases such as driving for fun. Gas-powered vehicles will be collector's items. I also anticipate large parts of city centers being mostly freed from surface vehicles and given back to people. Surface parking will be massively scaled down. Mobility will be fully integrated across modes with minimal interaction. Mobility will be electric or human-powered. It will be optimized for customer experience, cost, and traffic fluidity.
In 50 years, mobility will be sustainable. It has to be sustainable, otherwise it's a moot subject. Or if it is a subject, it's a very bleak one. So really the question then becomes, how does sustainability impact the future of mobility? How does it make it look different? So a few thoughts there. One, the forms of transit that have proven themselves to be sustainable or largely sustainable so far will continue to be invested in, and even more so. A great example of this would be high-speed rail. There's already significant adoption and projections around the growth of high-speed rail networks in China. There's even some signal in recent news here in the US, and we've historically not been so excited about high-speed rail. Staying in the terrestrial realm, it's very clear that in 50 years we will be using electric cars. It's a very strong signal there. But not only that, there's a very high likelihood that many of those cars will belong to fleets of highly autonomous vehicles. And I think that gets interesting whenever we start to think about what's the future of aviation and what does that look like. Because these innovations in the terrestrial realm are going to start chipping away more and more at aviation's short haul and to some extent medium haul routes. When it comes to long haul and kind of broader aviation, there's a lot of signal around sustainable aviation fuels being what aircraft use in 50 years. But what's interesting is that overlap where it's beginning to become more and more competitive between these terrestrial options and aviation options is we're going to start to see a lot more creativity from aviation around those short haul and medium haul routes. So I think we can fully expect to start to see interesting types of propulsion, electric, hydrogen at that range, and some really interesting new shapes and forms of aircraft.
What will mobility look like in 50 years? When we think about 2070 and beyond, there's a natural inclination to think about answering this question through the lens of new modalities. What are the ways of getting around that we have then that we don't have now, and imagining those potential leaps. And that's a pretty natural inclination because across our history we've done a really good job of adding those modalities. So we've moved from the wheel to the horse to the car to adding seafaring ships and jet airplanes and even space travel. And all those additions have been pretty transformative. But the most distinguishing characteristic, in my opinion, of human mobility 50 years from now will actually be intermodality. How do all of these modalities that we've created, how do they actually interrelate to one another in a way that benefits passengers and benefits human mobility? And that means solving for some really, really complicated handoffs between all of them to create a hyper-efficient, hyper-orchestrated form of human mobility.
How will mobility look like in 50 years? Over the next 50 years, mobility will undergo drastic transformation, triggered by advances in green tech that will facilitate the development of smarter infrastructure and cleaner modes of transport. Climate change is the greatest threat to the global security today, so the mobility of the future will have to gravitate towards integrated solutions that are energy efficient and sustainable. In response to the harmful fossil fuel emissions, renewable energy sources will be exploited as viable alternatives, increasing the prospect of wind turbine, solar panel and hydrogen power mobility. As the world is evolving into an arena of innovation, autonomous vehicles will become commonplace, electrical vehicles sales will grow, and conventional cars will be remodeled to be safer. At the same time, the consequences of increasing urbanization, such as traffic congestion and pollution, will shift attention to the circular economy and shared mobility, which will become more convenient, efficient, and accessible than ever before. Hyperloop technologies fit perfectly into this picture, holding the promise of disrupting long-distance travel by elevating public transit for both passengers and cargo at an incredible speed irrespective of weather conditions. This pod system will boost social welfare by reducing commuting time, road accidents, and carbon footprint. Although making predictions for a time so far ahead is perilous, it is certain that the future of mobility will inspire and challenge us to think differently and look for solutions beyond the confines of today.
It's clear that in 50 years, all mobility will have to be sustainable. Public transport infrastructure will be critical. And at Do for Aerospace, we believe that electric, sustainable aviation will also play an important role.
Hello everybody, my name is Juan Vicen and I am the co-founder and chief marketing officer at Celeros Hyperloop, and it's a pleasure to be here. Celeros is the European company based in Spain leading the development of a scalable Hyperloop system. In 50 years, we must say that we are optimistic. We believe that governments are going to face enormous pressures to race towards converting their mobility systems into a zero emissions ones. Inside the city, this change has already started with the shift to electric and hydrogen powered vehicles. But we believe that intercity mobility is the one that is going to change the most. The carbonization of aviation will take many years, but for transatlantic routes, we believe that airplanes will keep leading. But for inland routes between 400 and 1,500 kilometers in distance, Hyperloop will take the lead, complementing the ground transportation offer of high-speed rail, but unlocking higher speeds. The first pilot projects of Hyperloop are already ongoing, and the commercial routes will come in 2030. So we'll have a time frame of about 30 years more to develop Hyperloop routes all along the world.
The question about the long distance travel in 50 years is very hard to answer because we make assumptions that it will still take place. Now, we have to clearly distinguish between shorter long distance travel, let's say 50 to 100 miles, 100 kilometers, and then long distance in the spirit of transatlantic travel. For transatlantic travel, clearly it will be a plane of some sorts, and the question becomes whether we are able to fuel them CO2 neutrally. And clearly we are working on that, and we'll have to see how successful we are. Now, for the shorter long distances, the 50, 100, 200 kilometers, there will be a mixture because the trains are already there, and building additional systems will have to be justified in a major way.
If I'm asked to look into the future of a technology, I do the opposite. I take a look into the past. About 200 years ago, the time when we had the first railways, it took about 1 to 2 days to travel a distance of 100 kilometers. Today, the same distance can be traveled in less than an hour. On average, every 25 years, we were able, with new and improved technologies, to halve travel time. While it took us months to reach most points on this planet, 4 to 6 months at least, today we can reach those points in 24 or 48 hours, almost every place on this planet. If you want to continue reducing the travel times, the Hyperloop is one of the technologies that can help us reduce the times. We could make 100 kilometers in 10 minutes in 20 years. Why not? The Hyperloop would be a technology that allows us to do that.
Right now, so much of the effort and investment being made by Hyperloop companies is into the engineering challenge or the physics challenge of Hyperloop. How do we get a pod to move down a tube at Hyperloop speeds? That is, of course, critical to the future of Hyperloop. In the grand scheme of things, I don't think that physics problem is going to be the biggest challenge or gnarliest challenge that Hyperloop faces. So my prediction for the future is that we're going to see more and more Hyperloop companies folding in human-centered thinking and activities into their current engineering challenges. It's not enough to just think of these things in terms of physics or mechanics. We need to start thinking about all of these challenges and issues at human scale, in terms of what's the physiology, what is the psychology of experiencing these things. So I am speaking of passenger experience, but of course I'm not speaking about it in terms of something like how does a brand delightfully manifest itself into the Hyperloop experience. That will be addressed sometime later. But a lot more focus on that human scale. This is going to be critical for at least 2 reasons. One, it's easier to understand what Hyperloop might be if we explain it and understand it and solve for it at the human scale. It's just easier to tell those stories and to socialize the concept of what life might look like with Hyperloop. When it comes to near-term challenges of investment and buy-in, it's going to be critical that these states, these governments, these entities that are being approached and being asked to consider Hyperloop as a potential solution, that they understand how their people will be engaged if they are deploying something like Hyperloop in their society.
What predictions can you make about the future of Hyperloop? The following decades will be decisive for the advancement and early adoption of Hyperloop. The prospective degree of efficiency, safety, and convenience that these technologies will offer will be comparable to no other and will revolutionize long-distance travel to its core by disrupting the transportation industry and stir up society as a whole.
From Celeros, we predict that Hyperloop will have a bright future in the coming decades, and that the system that showcases the higher scalability for global deployment will be the one chosen for global implementation. Other alternatives will have a high impact in terms of infrastructure project cost and will only be used for shortened distances, without the power of creating a truly interconnected global network. That's why at Celeros we are supportive of the development of scalable Hyperloop systems and technologies with minimum infrastructure cost and the majority of the technologies in the vehicle. And that's why it's a pleasure to be here today explaining you why we believe that mobility is going to look like in the coming years.
What future will Hyperloop have? Hyperloop is an attractive proposition, but as a new system, it needs to be justified very carefully, because we'll have to decide what form of system it will become. Will it be a one system which looks at one-to-one travel, San Francisco to LA, or will it be a system which serves all major stops in between? And then, depending on that, it will also then depend on the parking and on the access to it. So, depending on those parameters, it will see whether there is an economic case to be made for it. Now, I do know that in many cases, economics has nothing to do with the system gets built or not. We'll have to see if there's any society which is willing to just build it to have it.
As with the adoption of any technology, in my point of view, it's got to address a need which is acutely felt by individual customers and firms in the markets. So, to what extent the Hyperloop can have a variety of different applications, so not up to speed on it. To situate that in Switzerland, which is what I'm most up to date on, the implementation has been mainly around a logistics use case, and I'm skeptical because, as I said, because it feels like we're addressing the middle miles of the logistics chain, which actually aren't the ones that are hurting us right now.
The technology that influences mobility the most is not the way we fuel it, or the propulsion system, or if it runs on wheels, on jet engines, or with the pantograph. It is the way we communicate with each other. The letter, the postcard, the telegraph, the telephone, radio, TV, internet, the smartphone, video conferencing tools, or even virtual reality worlds, or give it the holodeck, are all tools that help us connect with people and with places and with goods. But the more we use those tools, the more becomes our desire to meet those people, to get to these places and to connect with those goods. These are the true drivers of mobility.
Passenger mobility is being deeply transformed by a few technologies. The core ones are electrification and autonomous driving. This profound transformation is influenced by several factors, including global warming and air pollution, traffic congestion, and people's desire to make better use of their budget and to improve their life experience. This will impact all modes, especially those used in urban settings. First, the shift from fossil fuel is well engaged. Last year, 11% of all light vehicles sold in Europe were either battery electric or plug-in hybrids. In China, that number was 6%, whereas in the US it was still only about 2%. Electricity will not only be charged from the grid, but will also be generated from onboard by fuel cells, depending on the use case. Second is autonomous driving. Automation has been around for decades in metros, but it is still mostly at pilot stage for vehicles operating on the roads. The problem is much more complex to solve here. Autonomous vehicles such as shuttles, robotaxis, last-mile delivery vehicles will be deployed in lumps such as campuses, freeways, or city by city. This will happen over the next 5 to 10 years and beyond.
What technology will impact passenger mobility the most? A natural starting point when answering this question is to think about how new technologies will unlock existing modalities, how new technologies will unlock or add sort of superpowers to some of our existing ways of moving around. So a good example of that, of course, is how autonomous technology might change the way we interact and use automobiles. And for sure, that technology will be transformative. But when you think about what technologies will be the most transformative, it's likely that what we currently call virtual reality and augmented reality, the future generations of those technologies will be the most transformative in terms of the passenger experience. And that's because those technologies will actually challenge why we move around in the first place. So when we think about how VR and AR and their future iterations will impact human mobility, they will likely usher in a new era in which who moves around and why we move around, and even if we move around, is all transformed.
As the technological revolution is unraveling at an unprecedented pace, a variety of emerging technologies are likely to come together and change the way we experience mobility today. The application of AI and the IoT in autonomous driving system will improve travel safety and comfort in urban cities by offering a digitally customized experience which ensures passengers access to high-quality information from the optimal energy consumption to regular traffic updates. Hyperloop technologies will be the standard in most major cities around the world, where renewably powered pods will be part of day-to-day transport, enabling incredibly fast and efficient long-distance travel that will be readily accessible with the click of a button. These technologies have immense potential of enriching the quality of life of millions of travelers and transforming the way society works while minimizing environmental damage and traffic deaths. However, their ease of adoption will depend on how open different cities, regulators, and consumers are to embracing the implications of such a high degree of connectivity and radical innovation.
We really consider that tube transportation technologies combined with the connectivity and digitalization features will influence passenger mobility the most. That will shorten distances between cities and bring societies closer together. Specifically, power electronics and storage systems will have the higher impact on mobility systems, which will enable decarbonization in high-power applications that were thought impossible in the past.
Out of the technologies we have right now, it feels to me that this whole connected cars, connected transformation, and autonomous, of course they overlap with each other, is the most influential. I can imagine something analogous to what we've seen in the home over the last 15 years. In the home, experiences have become bigger, richer, more immersive, more multi-sensory, more seamless, more personalizable in the home. So entertainment experiences. And through connected cars, we're going to see that, through this sort of a technology, we're already seeing strong signals of that, and I expect that to continue. We will be less and less and less restricted in the in-vehicle experience, and autonomous, which is going to radically reduce the felt time wasted in getting from A to B. So those are the two biggies.
Now, will the battery or automation make the biggest difference? I think, given the concerns about global warming, it will be improved battery technologies and recharging, which will allow us to really move forward. Now, clearly, if we get full automation on top of that, that will be a brilliant thing if we keep that genie in a tight bottle so that the additional travel which can be generated by automation and batteries doesn't overwhelm the system, clearly, unless we're willing to rebuild our cities.